and thank you, Gonzalo, for this presentation, for your kind words, and also for this invitation. I'm honored to be here speaking with Luis Omblino and Diogo Ferrer, persons that I admire a lot, and I'm a follower of their works. So um, I will start my presentation. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. Uh, um, for, it be easier for you to follow. I hope that it will be easier for you to follow my reading, and it works. It's okay. Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
Okay. So I'm going to read my paper because my English is not very good, it's not famous. And for me, it's better, and maybe for you too. And I will start. So go to the first slide. Okay. I want to start with a brief introduction about environmental humanities. And I will say that the academic and scientific field of environmental humanities has grown rapidly over the past few decades in universities around the world, drawing on the disciplines of humanities and social science. This broad field of scholarship has emerged as a response to the environmental challenges of our time, engaging with fundamental questions of meaning, value, responsibility, and purpose in a time of rapid and escalating change. Since the 1960s, literature, cultural geography, sociology, anthropology, philosophy, and history gradually began to bridge the gaps between themselves and natural science, contributing to the environmental humanities with a strong research effort that shift the focus from the uniquely human world to the non-human world. In the last 2 decades, a number of other challenging theories have emerged that push the environmental humanities in new directions, proposing more fundamental transformations, both in how people understand their place in the world and in denouncing how social difference and interspecies hierarchies become environmental problems. New materialism, sorry, okay. New materialism, eco-criticism, indigenous and post-colonial criticism, animal studies, queer ecology, feminist theory, biosemiotics are only some of these new insights that demand a radical redefinition of the relationship between human beings and nature. By reinforcing the non-anthropocentric and often post-humanist approach, they have led to the deep questioning of the old dichotomous divisions between nature, culture, human, animal, male, female, organic, technological, text, reality, undermining forms of anthropocentrism and logocentrism that traditionally neglect the non-human world and extra-textual reality, and have further witnessed the space for the interdisciplinary dialogue of social science and humanities and natural science. This renewed approach to cultural objects highlight, on the one hand, the way in which the natural and material worlds determines human beings' intellectual and meaning-making systems, and on the other hand, the influence of human ideas on nature. It also has the virtue of vitalizing humanities and placing them at the forefront of the environmental issues of our time, a domain to which it seeks to contribute with a more integrated and conceptually sensitive insight and a richer conceptual vocabulary. Thus, in addition to the common critical dimension, the humanities are trying in this way to embrace a new strand, that of the environmental activism, that derives from the ecological force of objects under its scope. By rethinking the human in terms that are not exclusively human or anthropogenic, they seek to unsettle the foundations of the so-called human exceptionality. In sum, the environmental humanities positions us as participants in lively ecologies of meaning and value, entangled within rich patterns of cultural and historical diversity that shape who we are and the ways in which we are able to become with others. This definition brings out two fundamental and imbricated philosophical dimensions: hermeneutics and ethics. Leaving aside the question of ethics, we want for now to focus on hermeneutics. Keywords and expressions such as positions as, meaning, patterns of cultural and historical diversity, who we are, have everything to do with environmental hermeneutics. Even if this new branch of environmental philosophy does not have a fixed or closed definition, we can nevertheless identify a set of core concepts and research tendencies in recent years. So we move now to the second section, environmental hermeneutics and the human interpretation of places. The question of place is central in the research done in this field. If, according to the pioneer work of the Australian philosopher Val Plumwood, one central task of ecological humanities is to resituate the human firmly within environmental community, then we must start by questioning the relationship of humans to natural and inhabited places and spaces. Here, many researchers in phenomenology of space, we have two between us, Luís Omblino and Diogo Ferrer, and environmental hermeneutics have ridden the wave of spatial turn, entering into dialogue with cultural geography and the Rickerian hermeneutics, where they have found key concepts such as place, landscape, memory, geohistory, and narrative identity. Taking Paul Ricoeur's philosophical reflection on the subject as a touchstone, which in turn is in line with the pioneering works of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Gaston Bachelard, Martin Heidegger, Edward Cayce, and Geoff Malpass, environmental hermeneuticists conclude that places are mediators of relationships with nature and facilitators of environmental interpretations and self-interpretations. Since there is no direct or immediate access to the natural world, we can only assess it through the places we inhabit. Furthermore, by finding in or ascribing meaning to places, our relationship to them results in self-understanding, as we have listened from the presentation of the Professor Luís Omblino. For environmental hermeneuticists, the self cannot know itself apart from the world it inhabits, because self-knowledge, like all knowledge, is always situated knowledge. Place is the condition of possibility, or rather the medium through which an experience of the environment can take place and from which signs can be read and interpreted. To exist is to dwell. To exist is to interpret where we dwell. This is the premise of all environmental hermeneutics, to the end of having a world that can be shared and in which we dwell together. Thus, the recognition of space as an a priori condition of the lived body is the starting point for every anthropological and ecological debate. Let us remember that for environmental humanities, it is a question of principle to bear both on how we understand ourselves and how we understand the non-human world. How are human identities and responsibilities to be articulated when we understand ourselves to be members of multi-species communities that emerge through the entanglement of agential beings. Human geography can be particularly useful here by underlying this deep dependence of humans on the built and natural territories they inhabit. We have just to look at key concepts developed by early human geographers, such as place attachment, sense of place, and place identity. The phenomenon of landscape is also a strategic and heuristic instrument. Cultural geography conceives landscapes as texts to be interpreted, highlighting their polysemic and hermeneutic character. The word connotatively expresses how people assign meanings and value to their physical surroundings. Landscape is about the symbolic perception of natural environment, about the way in which people read that environment for meaning. In fact, there are as many gazes as landscapes as observers. This notion of landscape entails three strategic concepts for both environmental hermeneutics and environmental humanities. There are meaning, interpretation, and identity. On identity, let us just say that if landscapes strongly support the values of identity, place attachment, and belonging, this does not mean that landscapes should be seen as instruments of fixation and closure. The links between identities and territories are dynamic, not essentialist, and even less deterministic. So, there is no such a thing as a territorial identity in an eco-deterministic sense. The identity is that of man and not that of landscapes or places. In other words, instead of territorial identity, it makes more sense to talk about identification with the territory. It is in this regard that we can include landscape within the set of acquired identifications referred to by Paul Ricoeur in Oneself as Another. One person or a community can identify with one or more landscapes in the same way that can identify with values, norms, ideals, models, and heroes in which they recognize themselves. Ricoeur says, recognizing oneself in contributes to recognizing oneself by. Therefore, landscape can be considered as an enduring disposition by which a person or a community is recognized and contributes to its character and sameness. Even each of us is not born with an inherited, monolithic, and fixed identity, and does not have a single territorial affiliation, We can all easily admit that landscapes populate our individual and family memories and arouse our emotions. Hence, it is easy to identify with a landscape because, like character, it is fundamentally in house. It is fundamentally stable and long-lasting. On the other hand, like character, and I must add house, landscapes remain and change, since they are subject to the same dialectic of innovation and sedimentation. Ansgar, a French geographer, says that they are processes, in the sense that they are under permanent human configuration, updating, and reinterpretation. Then we must add that it is therefore up to the historian and to the geographer to redeploy or unfold through narrative what sedimentation has contracted, thus avoiding the exploitation of landscapes by the most harmful ideologies of territorial identities. But why can we interpret places and landscapes? The answer to this question is on the outset of environmental hermeneutics. Robert Mugerauer says that hermeneutics can be applied to the natural world because there is polysemy and a variety of interpretative possibilities, a fact corroborated by cultural geography as we saw above. This same idea is strongly emphasized by the environmental hermeneuticist David Huxley, based on Ricoeur. Sorry, not yet. Hermeneutics is not about decoding or uncovering the meaning or a single way of understanding. Hermeneutics recognizes both the inherent polysemy or multiplicity of understanding and the inherent conflict of interpretations frequently present among multiple meanings or supposed meanings. Place is usually defined as a space to which meaning has been ascribed. Where there is meaning, there is necessarily interpretation. In this sense, more than being compared to texts or exclusively to texts, territories are authentic semiological fields, full of evidence from the past, whether intentional impressions or occasional traces, human or natural, which require from the observer a careful reading, interpretation, and decipherment, since places are never self-explanatory per se, but rather need narratives and interpretations that attach meaning to abstract geographical space. And this work of reading or refiguration, to use recurrent terminology, naturally contributes to the construction of identity and awakening of environmental and cultural values. Therefore, it is no longer a matter of reading the territory and landscape as a text, but of reading based on the semiotics of the territory and its semantics in multiple formats. Place can be seen, for example, as a scene, as an image, as a body. This way of understanding landscapes is in line with the concept of material ecocriticism, developed by Serenella Iovino and Serpil Opperman, in the sense that landscapes can be considered a more than human materiality, which in turn contains numerous other more than human materialities in a constant process of shared becoming that tell us something about the world we inhabit. The conceptual argument of material ecocriticism gives strength to this idea of landscapes as narratives of matter, as well as of narratives as stories of matter. In their words, the world's material phenomena are knots in a vast network of agencies, which can be read and interpreted as forming narratives, stories. developing in bodily forms and in discursive formulations and arising in co-evolutionary landscapes of natures and science, the stories of matter are everywhere. In the air we breathe, the food we eat, in the things and beings of the world within and beyond the human realm. All matter, in other words, is a storied matter. It is a material mesh of meanings, properties, and process in which human and non-human players are interlocked in networks that produce undeniable signifying forces. Thus, material ecocriticism examines matter both in texts and as a text, trying to shed light on the way bodily natures and discursive forces express their interaction, whether in the representations or in their concrete reality. With this idea in mind, we now want to reflect on the storied matter and the role that environmental hermeneutics can play there. So we move now to the third section, environmental hermeneutics and human interpretations of texts. Having resituated the human firmly within an environmental community, it is now time to turn to the second task assigned by Val Plumwood to ecological humanities, which is to resituate non-humans and more than humans within the cultural and ethical domains created by humans, showing how they were equally embedded in these human meaning and value-making systems. In the previous section, we brought hermeneutics closer to disciplines such as human and cultural geography and philosophical phenomenology. Now we will bring it closer to ecocriticism, cultural ecology, and ecosemiotics. In the previous section, we talked about interpreting places and matter as texts. Now it is a matter of interpreting the texts themselves. The goal is to underline the patterns of cultural and historical diversity that shape who we are and the ways in which we are able to become with others. Here too, hermeneutics has something important to say. At least since Dilthey and Heidegger, but especially with Gadamer and Ricoeur, hermeneutics has revealed an ontological dimension, reflecting on how cultural and historical patterns affect our understanding of the world and our self-understanding, shaping who we are and what we do. It is for this reason that Ricoeur argues for something that is very significant for the environmental humanities: the opening of texts to life, overcoming the pantextual and pansemiotic universe of postmodernism. According to the French philosopher, we can only understand ourselves and the meaning of life through the long detour of the signs of humanity depicted in cultural works. That is, only through what we call culture, and which presents itself to us in a codified and ambiguous form, requiring interpretation, can we reach the most labyrinthic and opaque side of human reality. Among these cultural works, narrative, historical, and fictional plays a fundamental role. Contrary to the theories of French structuralists and semioticians, Ricoeur advocates hermeneutics that sees the literary text not merely as an abstract structure or an isolated object reduced to its internal laws, but as a situated object with the real or ethical field of praxis upstream, mimesis 1, the field of reception or refiguration downstream, mimesis 3, and between them, the operating and of configurating that constitutes emplotment, mimesis 2. Since only by building a relationship between the three mimetic modes can we build the bridge between life, agency, suffering, and narrative. It is the task of hermeneutics to reconstruct the set of operations by which a work lifts itself above the opaque depths of living, acting, and suffering to be given by an author to readers who receive it and thereby change their acting. This threefold mimesis starts and ends in the ethical fields of praxis, taking the sentence rather than the sign as the unity of discourse. Ricoeur oriented language beyond itself, towards the extra-linguistic domain, because the sentence says something about something. This thesis rejects the strict immanence of literary language in relation to itself, for the sake of the power that literary works have on bringing an experience to language and thus to the world. It is based on this epistemological and hermeneutic premise that we can begin to interpret texts with the aim of perceiving how material and non-humans feature prominently in human meaning-making systems, thus decentering humanity as the sole source of meaning-making. Literature plays a major role in this process, insofar as literary texts have staged and explored the manifold and complex interactivity between culture and nature in ever new scenarios, and have derived their specific potential of innovation and cultural self-renewal from the creative exploration of this boundary. What this means is that literature is not only a preferred discursive site for representing and negotiating the culture-nature relationship, but that in its aesthetic transformation of experience, it acts like an ecological force within the larger system of culture and of cultural discourses. From its archaic beginnings in mythical storytelling and oral narratives, in legends and fairy tales, in the genres of pastoral and nature poetry, but also in modes of the comic, gothic, and grotesque, literature has symbolically expressed the fundamental interconnectedness between culture and nature in tales of human genesis, of metamorphosis, of symbiotic coevolution, and coexistence between different life forms. Therefore, not only texts about nature or nature writing are useful for ecological awareness and environmental education, but all literary genres, from archaic epic to modern romance, testify in some way to the human natural, historical, and contextualized interdependency. In fact, according to Gregory Bateson, ecological thinking is closer to metaphorical than to logocentric speech. Its ecology of mind or ecology of ideas is based on the premise that there is a complex feedback system between mind and body, culture and nature. For him, culture is the stage where the interdependence between humans and their surrounding ecosystems become evident. Now, I thought to present the theories of Kalevi-Kuhl in semiotic ecology and Timo Maran towards the integrated methodology of ecosemiotics, but I don't have the time, so I move on to finish this section. And after the conclusion, these two authors are ecosemiotic authors, but I tried to show that they are very connected with the hermeneutics of Ricoeur, the importance of the text and the narrative to make the bridge between the reader and the world. So we have seen that understanding literature as a medium of cultural ecology is a way of bringing out the codependency of natural process and cultural forms of meaning-making. In this sense, literary texts are situated on the boundary between culture and nature, self and other, anthropocentric and biocentric dimensions of existence. However, and I must underline this, however, this This does not imply that culture is determined by nature's deterministic causal laws, nor that this relationality and interconnectedness means the total abolition of the boundaries and difference that exist both on the material and on the cultural levels. Cultural ecology, for example, resists the ecocentric tendency to reduce culture and nature to each other, thinking together the two axiomatic premises of an ecological epistemology: connectivity and diversity, relationality and difference. Hubert Zapf takes up very well the significant consequences for eco-criticism, and we may add for all environmental hermeneutics, of the elementary principle of a vital interrelatedness, yet evolutionary difference between culture and nature. While it helps to overcome the deeply entrenched culture-nature dualism and its anthropocentric ideology of supremacy and exploitative dominance over non-human nature, it also resists opposite attempts to simply dissolve culture into nature and to replace an anthropocentric ideology by a physiocentric or ecocentric naturalism. What is needed is neither a naturalistic reduction of culture nor a culturalist reduction of nature. Rather, between anthropocentrism and ecocentrism, he prefers the ecocritical Serenella Iovinus notion of a non-anthropocentric humanism. I have a session here. I should talk here about the environmental hermeneutics and the non-human interpretation of environment. This means the interpretation of the environment made by other organisms than humans, more than humans, like animals. But I don't have the time. So biosemiotics, I keep biosemiotics for another presentation in the future. So I move on, letting biosemiotics for another occasion. And I move to the conclusion because the time is running. And after this overview of the environmental humanities, we can conclude that meaning, interpretation, place, narrative, and identity are concepts that occupy a central position in the various disciplines covered by this main field of research. These are also pivotal concepts to philosophical hermeneutics and with which environmental hermeneutics has been dealing since its inception. What then can be the role of environmental hermeneutics within environmental humanities? Beyond the task of interpreting the environment, shedding light on human, non-human, and culture, nature, interdependence, and co-evolutionary becoming, as it happens with other disciplines, environmental hermeneutics can assume an epistemological and meta-reflexive role, clarifying concepts and problematizing theories. Indeed, interpretation, meaning, narrative, identity, and even space have long been discussed in many different ways throughout the history of philosophical hermeneutics. Epistemologically, by signaling the mediating character of science and texts, hermeneutics opens culture to nature and strengthens the bridge between them. Moreover, as we have seen, the relationship of humans to non-humans and material realities is always mediated through symbolic and cultural expressions, the long way of Ricardian hermeneutics. Environmental hermeneutics has specifically extended this mediation to nature, considering places or landscapes as mediators and identity configurators. By stating the polysemic character of meanings and the consequent pluralism of interpretations, philosophical hermeneutics promotes dialogue and avoids monolithic and reductionist interpretations. by explaining that meanings are always historically and geographically situated and conditioned by previous interpretations, the well-known hermeneutic circle of Schleiermacher, Heidegger, and Gadamer, it alerts to the need for the historical and spatial contextualization of any reading, whether textual, geographical, or metaphorical. By recalling the creative power of metaphor in culture, hermeneutics lays the foundation of the so-called natural metaphor, which operates outside texts and is common to all living organisms, human and non-humans, exposing the semiosis and poetics inherent in the entire natural world. Last but not least, it is our conviction that one of the most important tasks of environmental hermeneutics is to promote interdisciplinarity between human social science and natural science. On this specific point, the hermeneutic and recurrent dialectics between understanding and explanation can pave the way to this dialogue, helping to reconcile subjectivity and objectivity, arts and science, fiction and reality, thus avoiding interpretive anarchy. Environmental hermeneutics that claims to be scientific, it's obliged to resort to data from natural science under the recurrent motto, explain more to understanding better. By performing these tasks in a rigorous and critically manner, environmental hermeneutics can play an important role within environmental humanities, while also contributing to the promotion and reinforcement of ecological ethical values in these times of environmental crisis. So thank you very much for your attention and for your patience too.